Committee will come to order, and I want to apologize to all of our witnesses. It is not that what you're doing is not important. They have unfortunately called a caucus meeting of the Democratic Party, and so that explains these guys. Now, Roscoe will have to tell you where those guys are. But anyway, the committee will come to order. The purpose of this afternoon's hearing is to receive testimony on the progress of construction of the Navy's surface combatant fleet. Testifying today are representatives of the Department of the Navy, along with independent experts from the Congressional Research Service, Congressional Budget Office, and the Government Accountability Office. On behalf of the entire subcommittee, I welcome the witnesses and look forward to their testimony. Today's first panel is composed of our independent experts in ship operation and construction. They are Mr. Ronald Rourke, a specialist in national defense from the Congressional Research Service. Mr. Michael Gilmore, Assistant Director for National Security Research, and Dr. Eric Labb's Naval Analysis Congressional Budget Office. Mr. Paul Francis from the Government Accountability Office. Second panel is composed of representatives from the Department of the Navy, Vice Admiral Paul Sullivan, Commander, Naval Sea Systems Command, Mrs. Allison Stiller, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Ships, Rear Admiral Barry McCullough, Director of Warfare Integration on the staff of the Chief of Naval Operations, Mr. Dub Summerall, Executive Director for Surface Combatants, Office of the Program Executive Officer. Again, I thank the witnesses and welcome them here today. The subcommittee has asked the witnesses to give an update on the construction status of 4 of our major shipbuilding programs: the Littoral Combat Ship, the San Antonio-class amphibious assault ship, the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, and the Gerald Ford-class aircraft carrier. This subcommittee, and I believe this Congress, is committed to restoring the nation's fleet and preserving the strike and expeditionary warfare capability of the Navy and Marine Corps. This is vitally important to the long-term security of our nation. Decisions we make concerning the size of the fleet will have effects for decades to come. We need to get this right. We need to do it now. Only the Navy and the Marine Corps, embarked with the expeditionary strike groups, have the ability to respond to crises anywhere in the world on short notice, with overwhelming force in the face of an enemy, or with significant humanitarian aid in the event of a natural disaster. Our nation must maintain this capability. However, cost and schedule overruns on virtually every Navy shipbuilding program threaten to sabotage the goal for 313-ship Navy envisioned by the Chief of Naval Operations. This year, we have seen a total restructuring of the Littoral Combat Ship program caused by over-optimistic predictions of cost and schedule. The Marine Corps Expeditionary Fighting Vehicle has likewise suffered optimistic cost and schedule performance. The Coast Guard Deepwater program has been beset by technical and performance issues. Everywhere this Congress turns, there is another major program suffering from either poor management, technical challenges, or both. There is not an unlimited supply of funding for these programs. And right now, the mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle program must have Congress's and the Department's top priority, because these vehicles can save lives today. This hearing is important. We need to understand all the challenges facing the ship construction program so that we can make informed decisions for the future force. I again thank our witnesses and look forward to your insights on the important matters. Now I recognize my partner and the former chairman of this committee, the Honorable Roscoe Bartlett of Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank both panels of witnesses for being with us today. I understand that many of my colleagues have a hard stop at 4 o'clock this afternoon, so I will keep my remarks brief in the interest of getting to our witnesses' statements. I would really like to thank the chairman as well as the witnesses from the Navy for today's format. So often we have non-DOD witnesses testify in the second panel. These witnesses often have very perspective insights, but when they testify last, it does not allow members to follow up with questions for the DOD. Today we'll have a chance to hear from these witnesses and then immediately discuss some of the oversight issues they have raised with the subject matter experts from the Navy. Although I expect that much of today's hearing will focus on the persistent challenges of LCS and LPD-17 programs, I am glad we will be getting an update on DDG-1000 and CVN-21. I understand that as these programs come closer to completion of design and the start of construction, they too are facing serious schedule, cost, and weight challenges. I am especially interested to know how the Navy is applying lessons learned from LCS and LPD-17 to these shipbuilding programs to avoid similar pitfalls as detailed design concludes and construction begins. With respect to LCS, I was dismayed to learn of additional schedule slippage on LCS-1 and the further potential impact of workforce challenges at Marinette Marine. I would like the Navy to provide us with a detailed update on the construction status of both LCS-1 and LCS-2. I would also like the Navy to address the status of LCS-4. What are the cost trends for this platform? What actions is the Navy taking to ensure equitable treatment between the two contractors? As well, we have heard a number of disturbing stories in the press recently regarding LPD-17. I would like to understand what risks remain in the completion of construction and performance of LPD-17, 18, and 19 in particular. What lessons has the Navy learned about accepting delivery of ships prior to the completion of construction? Has the Navy ever done this before? Does the Navy believe it may have to do it again? What types of contractual remedies could have prevented such a situation? Finally, I'm concerned about the impact that a potential shortage of steel may have on our shipbuilding programs. It is my understanding that the Defense Contract Management Agency recently conducted an industrial capabilities assessment for the MRAP program. According to this assessment, the limiting factor for producing large quantities of MRAP vehicles is material constraints and not the production capacity of the prime contractors. Tires and specialty mil-spec thin-gauge armor plate are the two primary material constraints limiting production. It is imperative that we understand how the consumption of these materials for MRAP will impact other DoD programs, particularly the shipbuilding programs this subcommittee oversees. There's no reason why we should learn 6 months from now that another critical platform cannot be delivered or has experienced excessive cost growth because all the steel has gone to MRAP. It is incumbent upon the department to do a thorough evaluation of these impacts now and for members to fully understand the hard choices that will have to be made. All of our witnesses, DoD and non-DoD, are performing an important job for our warfighters. Again, thank you for being here, and I look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. Sheriff Ellsworth, do you have an opening statement?
No, sir.
Okay. With that, the chair would now recognize, I would hope in this order, we'll start with Mr. O'Rourke.
Chairman Taylor, Ranking Member Bartlett, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on these programs. With your permission, I'd like to submit my statement for the record and summarize it for you briefly.
Without objection.
Could you pull your microphone a little closer? Thank you.
Concurrency between design and construction was a significant cause of cost growth on the LCS. Avoiding such concurrency is an old lesson in defense acquisition. In this sense, the LCS program is not so much an instance of new lessons learned as of old lessons that were forgotten. Over the last several months, the Navy has maintained its support for procuring 55 LCSs. Maintaining stability in planned numbers can help control costs. At the same time, however, there's a risk of industry receiving an implicit message from the Navy that for the LCS, substantial cost growth does not pose a significant threat to planned numbers. Such a message might not be conducive to rigorous cost control. As the cost of the LCS increases, it puts added pressure on the shipbuilding budget. But the more pressure there is on the shipbuilding budget, the more Navy officials might believe they need to keep the relatively inexpensive LCS in the mix of ships being procured. Such a paradoxical situation might not be helpful to rigorous cost control in the program. The Navy testified that it was overly optimistic on the LCS program. It also testified that compared to CBO, the Navy budgets to a much more aggressive number on its shipbuilding programs. This raises a question regarding what the difference is between overly optimistic and much more aggressive. A potential issue for the subcommittee is whether the Navy's requested figure of $460 million would be too high to use in amending the LCS cost cap. If $460 million is more than what these ships are expected to cost, then amending the cost cap to that figure might encourage some to believe that additional growth up to $460 million would be acceptable, which again would not be conducive to rigorous cost control. Of the $160 million in post-delivery work performed on LPD-17, a substantial part was for construction work that was remaining to be done on the ship when the Navy took delivery. This post-delivery work was funded through a line item that is not included in ship end cost, so the ship's reported end cost will understate its actual construction cost. The Navy Acquisition Executive is now planning quarterly reviews of Northrop Grumman ship systems and the ships under contract there. A potential question for the subcommittee is why such reviews are only now being planned, given the history of the LPD program, and why they aren't being planned for all shipyards and all shipbuilding programs, given cost growth on other ships. Despite putting an additional LPD at the top of its FY08 unfunded priorities list, the Navy has expressed caution about this option, in part because it believes the shipyard wouldn't be able to start work on an additional LPD right away. Although that might be the case, Congress could still decide to procure the ship in FY08, particularly if it decides that it has the funding this year, but perhaps not in a future year, to do so. Funding 2 LPDs in FY08 with the knowledge that the second one might not be started right away could be viewed as somewhat analogous to Congress's decisions in FY83 and FY88 to fund the procurement of 2 aircraft carriers in a single year, with the knowledge each time that the second ship would be started sometime after the first. As DDG 1000 technologies mature, technical risk in the program will shift to the task of system integration. Since the Navy is acting as the program's system integrator, the program will be an early test of DoD's ability to perform the system integration function following the downsizing of DoD's technical and acquisition workforce. Under the DDG 1000 workshare agreement, the Navy might have the option of having the 2 yards compete for the role of final assembly yard for the third and subsequent ships. A potential question for the subcommittee is whether such a competition, particularly if done on a one-time basis, would be consistent with the intent of prior legislation prohibiting the Navy from a winner-take-all acquisition strategy for the program. The Navy might find it difficult to fund both the 5th DDG and the lead CGX in FY11. One option for addressing this would be to accelerate the procurement of that DDG to FY09 or FY10. Another possible option for the program would be to authorize the Navy to use a block buy for procuring several of the DDGs. This could reduce their cost by a few %, enough, for example, to procure an additional LCS. Information provided by the Navy suggests that the Navy's estimate for CVN 78 may be optimistic. The Navy interprets the cost cap on the CVN program as being expressed in FY06 then-year dollars. A potential question for the subcommittee is whether this interpretation is correct. If it is, then CVN 78 and 79 could each experience hundreds of millions of dollars of cost growth without exceeding their caps. This situation might not be conducive to rigorous cost control. A potential option for the Congress would be to authorize a block buy for CVN 78 and 79, or for CVN 79 and 80. The potential savings from such a block buy could be enough, for example, to procure an additional Navy auxiliary ship or 2 LCSs. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement, and I'll be happy to respond to any questions the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke. The chair now recognizes Dr. Gilmore.
Mr. Chairman, Congressman Bartlett, members of the subcommittee, my colleague Eric Lapps and I appreciate the opportunity to appear here today to discuss the Navy's shipbuilding programs. CBO's analysis indicates a couple of things. First of all, executing the Navy's most recent 30-year shipbuilding plan will cost an average of about $23 billion a year in 2008 dollars, or about 30% more than the Navy has projected. And historical experience, including very recent experience that Ron has discussed, suggests that a number of the Navy's shipbuilding programs, particularly the DDG 1000 guided missile destroyer and the CGX future cruiser, continue to face considerable risk of cost growth relative to the Navy's current projections for the costs of those ships. Eric will discuss some of the details underpinning those conclusions, but before he does that, I'd like to provide the subcommittee a little bit of context that I hope it will find useful as it considers the Navy's current shipbuilding program and plans. Regarding the Navy's past and planned shipbuilding purchases, assuming that the notional service life of the fleet is 35 years, the Navy would need to buy an average of 8.9 or about 9 ships per year to sustain a 313-ship fleet. During the 16 years of the Clinton and Bush administrations, however, the Navy has acquired ships at a rate of about 7 per year. Thus, above-average purchases will be necessary over the next 30 years to meet the Navy's goal for fleet size. During the 8 years of the Reagan administration, the Navy spent $138 billion, all these costs are in 2008 dollars, to buy 147 ships at an average cost of about $0.9 billion apiece, $900 million apiece. And of course, that was to support a much larger fleet, almost twice the size of the one we have today. In the 8 years of the Clinton administration, the Navy spent $62 billion to buy 54 ships at an average cost of $1.2 billion a ship. In the 8 years of the Bush administration, the Navy will spend, according to most recent plans, about $98 billion to purchase 53 ships at an average cost of $1.9 billion per ship. So 54 ships during the Clinton administration, 53 ships during the Bush administration, and an increase in cost per ship of about 50%. During the 8-year period spanning 2009 to 2016, the Navy plans to spend $158 billion to purchase 91 ships at an average cost of $1.7 billion per ship, CBO estimates. Thus, notwithstanding the large purchase of what are called inexpensive littoral combatant ships during the next 8 years, the Navy plans for 2009 through 2016 indicate it will spend about 15% more than during the Reagan years in total, while purchasing about 40% fewer ships. Now, these ships will be more capable, perhaps, than the ships that were purchased during the Reagan administration, but numbers also matter, and the numbers are going to be smaller, while the costs will be higher. Regarding CBO's estimates for the cost of the Navy ships, CBO considers the relationship between cost and weight, specifically the cost per 1,000 tons of light ship displacement, as one of the key factors determining its projections for the prices of future naval vessels. That method assumes, broadly speaking, that what's happened in the past will happen again. CBO takes count of changes in productivity improvements in shipbuilding practices and procedures, but such changes are frequently offset by, for example, cost increases for labor and materials, unexpected production problems, increased requirements, or new technologies. In testimony before this subcommittee, some Navy officials have characterized our methodology for estimating costs as worst-case analysis or extremely conservative estimating techniques that seek to include all possible sources of cost risk. In that regard, I note that our method would have understated the actual cost of the littoral combat ship, the LPD-17 amphibious warfare ship, and the CVN-76 and CVN-77 aircraft carriers, and it would have closely approximated the cost of the lead Virginia-class attack submarine. Now I'll turn to Eric for some additional details.
Chair recognizes Dr. Labs.
Mr. Chairman, Congressman Bartlett, members of the subcommittee, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today to discuss the Navy ship programs. I will focus my remarks on the DDG-1000, the CVN-78, and the LCS programs. In CBO's view, the Navy's cost estimate for the DDG-1000 is optimistic. Using the DDG-51 destroyer and the CG-47 class cruiser as analogies, CBO estimates that the two lead DDG-1000s will cost about $4.8 billion each, while the Navy's estimate is about $3 billion each. The Navy has argued that comparing the DDG-1000 with the DDG-51 may not be valid because the design of the DDG-51 was disrupted and incomplete when construction began. In comparison, the design of the DDG-1000 is going more smoothly, and the Navy expects to have the design largely settled when construction begins. Also, the Navy says the DDG-51 was a smaller, more densely built ship, and thus, on a ton-for-ton basis, was more difficult and more expensive to construct than the DDG-1000 class will be. Several factors offset those arguments. First, as Navy officials state, lead ships are difficult to build and encounter unexpected problems during construction. The first two littoral combat ships and the LPD-17, both of which are much less complex technologically than the DDG-1000, illustrate that point. The lead DDG-1000 may not have the same difficulties as the DDG-51, but it will have problems of its own. Second, the DDG-1000 program is incorporating 10 new technologies that are not found on current destroyers. In the past, the Navy has typically introduced just 3 or 4 new technologies in a new class of surface combatants. Integrating them may prove more challenging than the Navy anticipates. Finally, a comparison of the Navy's cost estimates for 2 more DDG-51s and for the 7th DDG-1000 to be purchased in 2013 illustrates the risk for cost growth. The Navy stated to this subcommittee that 2 additional DDG-51s authorized in 2008 would cost $1.5 to $1.6 billion each. At the same time, the Navy expects the 7th DDG-1000 purchased in 2013 to cost about $2.1 billion in 2013 dollars. Deflated to 2008 dollars using the Navy's inflation index, that equals $1.6 billion, or the same as an additional DDG-51s that benefit from efficiencies and learning of 62 prior ships. The light ship displacement of the DDG-1000 is 5,000 tons more than the DDG-51. In effect, the Navy's numbers imply that those 5,000 extra tons and the 10 new technologies will be free. CBO also believes that the Navy's cost estimate for the CVN-78 is optimistic. The Navy estimates that the ship will cost $10 billion in 2008 dollars, including $2.2 billion for non-recurring engineering and design. The Navy argues that construction time and cost for the CVN-78 will be less than for the CVN-77. In contrast, CBO estimates the CVN-78 will cost about $11 billion, including cost growth that has affected past shipbuilding programs at the same stage of construction. And if the CVN-78 experiences cost growth similar to other lead ships, then the cost could even be higher. The LCS was supposed to be a simple to design and build and cost about $250 million in 2008 dollars per seaframe. The reported cost growth, especially the Navy's need to raise the cost gaps for the 5th and 6th ships to $460 million, implies that the Navy's estimate for the total acquisition cost for the first 2 LCSs will be around $600 million each. Historical experience had suggested that cost growth would occur in the LCS program. Historical cost-weight relationships using the lead ship of the FFG-7 class of frigates as an analogy indicated that the Navy's original cost target for the LCS was highly optimistic. The first FFG-7, including its combat systems, cost a total of about $650 million in 2008 dollars. That suggests that the lead LCSs would cost about $575 to $600 million apiece. In short, cost-to-weight relationships produced an estimate less than the cost of the first LCSs, but substantially greater than the Navy's original estimate. Incorporating the most recent cost growth, CBO estimates that the first 2 LCSs would cost about $630 million each as a total acquisition cost. As the program advances with a settled design and higher rates of production, the average cost per ship is likely to decline to about $450 million each, excluding mission modules. A quick note on the LPD-17. On a per-ton basis, the LPD-17 is the most expensive amphibious warship ever built. And while the Navy's costs of follow-on ships have come down, they are still far above the Navy's original estimates. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I would like to add that CBO uses what I would call a realistic approach to estimating the cost of ships. In my 10 years as a naval analyst, CBO has yet to overprice a ship. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, sir. The chair now recognizes Mr. Franks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, Mr. Francis.
I've been called worse. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Ellsworth, for involving me in the discussion of shipbuilding issues today. I will echo what Mr. O'Rourke said. The problems in shipbuilding today I don't think are new to shipbuilding, nor are they unique to shipbuilding. As Mr. Chairman, you noticed the expeditionary fighting vehicles had those problems. We see those across the board in weapon systems. I think what's different today is it's our turn to wrestle with the problem and to make headway on it, and I really think we can. The first thing I'd like to talk about is cost growth in shipbuilding, and suffice it to say that the patient does have a fever. In the over 40 ships that are in construction today, they've overrun by a total of about $5 billion so far. Most of that you've paid for, but more is coming. If you look at cost growth, you'll see that lead ships are the long pole in the tent. They typically overrun by about 30%. That's going to be a real challenge for us because in the Navy shipbuilding plan, there's about 9 classes of new ships, so we really have to get those right. One of the things that you realize when you look at cost growth is in construction, it takes about, you have to get about 60% into the construction of a ship before you actually start to recognize real cost. So that means there's a time lag of several years between when you authorize money for construction and you get real data on what it's really costing, and then you get the overruns. And that's what we've seen, I think, recently on the LPD and the LCS. And for that reason, you need to put the DDG 1000 and the CVN 78 on your watch list because they're just going into that phase. And in particular, we have to watch the margins for error on these programs because even with LCS, 100% overruns $200 million. A 10% overrun on DDG is $300 million. 10% on the carrier will be $1 billion. So margins for error will be much smaller there, I hope. That puts a lot of pressure, I think, on the committee and what it does in the 08 and 09 budget deliberations because the monies that you authorize there are going to be a factor in whether and how large the overruns will be in 10, 11, 12, 13. So you ask yourself, gee, what can we do about this structural problem? And I think what we really need is a new paradigm for establishing programs and overseeing them. And I'd say that would consist of three things. One is a better business case, a real solid business case up front for programs, a good plan for making business arrangements and contracting on programs, and good plan for execution. And I think to curb the optimism of what we see in programs today, we really do need that solid business case up front, which I would describe as firm requirements, mature technologies, a knowledge-based laydown of all the key events in design and construction, coupled with metrics for goodness. It's one thing to lay the events down. It's another to have a set of metrics or criteria to know whether they make sense or not. Now, with that, you'd have to put good resources, time, money, and people. I think time, schedule, will be derived from a good knowledge-based laydown of a program. And I think cost will come from that as well. But I think there are other things we can do with cost estimating, such as confidence levels. In terms of business arrangements, just mean what we're doing with competition and what we're doing with contracting strategies. And on contracting strategies, it's the type of contract, how we're going to scope work in the contract, and the government's roles there. And there's a couple lessons learned in contracting, and one is it makes sense to separate detailed design from construction, as the committee has stated this year, and it makes sense to separate lead ships from follow-on ships. And finally, in the area of execution, basically talking about two things there. One is the shipyard's ability to design and construct the ship that they have at hand, and the government's ability to provide what I would call agile oversight. That is, the ability to detect and react to variances before they become big problems. And if you took a lens like that and applied it to a couple of programs, like LCS, I think that's one. You'd say, gee, the cost estimate was no good, schedule estimate was no good, requirements were in flux. We tried to do detailed design, system design, and construction at the same time. When we signed up for construction, we didn't understand the design. We went with a shipyard that wasn't very experienced with designing naval surface combatants. And the government was, I think, too focused on schedule and not the whole program. Take the same lens and put it on CVN 78, which, for what it's worth, I happen to think is a pretty well laid out program, pretty well managed, but nonetheless, you see risks. You see very demanding requirements, high technical content with, I think, several breakthrough technologies that are not mature yet, a schedule that's bounded by the retirement of the enterprise, and a cost estimate that is optimistic. And the budget is set at the target right now, and we've never delivered a lead ship in target. So that's a very pressurized business case for the CVN. In their business arrangements, I think they're doing pretty well. We gave them an extra year, and that construction preparation contract allowed them to really pursue a robust design process. And I think they'll have 75% of their design before they go into construction. They separated detailed design from construction, so that's good. We see some risks in execution, which I would describe as the technologies. There's three really key technologies that have had problems. Their schedules have slipped to the right. They've used up all their margin. If they have more problems, they're going to interrupt the ship's construction schedule. So, just using that lens, you come back and say, well, why can't we do that more on other programs? And I'd say, I think there's a language barrier. When we look at programs, it seems like each program uses a different language to describe its key events, the criteria it's using for judging the completeness of those events. And the programs are scheduling milestone decisions at different point relative to those events. So it's hard to get a common language. And I'll just use LCS as an example. I think everyone would agree that the launch of the first ship was premature with only 63% of construction done. I can see that. Well, what should it have been? What are the standards for launch? What are the things that should have happened beforehand? And can't we see that in a proposal for a ship? And if it's true for launch, isn't it true for keel lay? Isn't it true for fabrication? detailed design, system design. Those are the types of things I think are knowable when a program is presented for approval. So again, I would just sum up by saying we really need a knowledge-based foundation for solid executable business cases on these programs that does provide transparency for oversight. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you very much. Mr. O'Rourke, you testified about the Navy's proposed change to the cost cap for LCS. Do you or any of the other witnesses have any thoughts about how Congress might more effectively implement cost caps? For example, would it be feasible to establish caps on labor hours or material costs by imposing a cost reduction or labor savings scale similar to a learning curve?
That's a possibility. My own sense is that there might be an advantage in keeping the cost cap as legislated simpler rather than more complex, so as to preserve the Navy's ability to manage the program under that cap in the best way that it can find how. In terms of options for amending the cost cap, I mentioned in my opening remarks one issue about the $460 million figure possibly being a little too high. If it's actually higher than what the Navy might expect those ships to cost, then you're actually providing some room for extra cost growth on those ships. And so one potential issue for the subcommittee to explore would be whether the $460 million figure is perhaps too high, and if so, what a lower figure should be. The second thing, in terms of how else you might think about amending the cost cap, would be to apply the cost cap not to simply ships 5 and 6 in the program, but to some or all of the follow ships in the program. Some of the other cost caps that the subcommittee has implemented on Navy shipbuilding programs have applied to a larger number of ships in the program in question. And the subcommittee can look to those examples as potential models for how they might want to go about amending the cost cap on the LCS program.
Thank you. Dr. Gilmore, you mentioned that recent ship procurements are costing us roughly 50% more than the prior generation. I assume that those are in constant dollars, so that we can compare dollar to dollar?
Yes, the numbers I cited were in 2008 dollars. They were averages over all the ships that were bought during certain periods.
Clearly, these newer ships have more capabilities. But in the commercial world, each new generation of sophisticated, complex equipment has increased capabilities over the last generation, and they're costing less. Why are our ships costing more?
I don't have an answer for you that would satisfy you. I mean, we haven't. I like to base my answers on the results of analysis. We haven't done any analysis that would shed light on that. You know, I can only observe that this is the trend, not just for shipbuilding, as I think Mr. Francis mentioned and Mr. O'Rourke mentioned. This is the trend not just for shipbuilding, but it's been a long-established trend for all DoD weapon systems, which are built only for the government. For which the government assumes all the risk of development. It pays all the costs of development. Those aren't recouped later on. And so there are just a lot of unique aspects to these programs in terms of requirements, which are usually aggressive in terms of what the new capabilities are that are wanted, and in terms of who bears the risk, which is the government, and who the prime customer is, which is the government, and it's a customer for a relatively small number of items, although they're obviously very expensive items, that are at variance with what happens in the commercial world. And so, not having done the analysis, I can't tell you exactly which of those factors are most important or quantify how they're important. I can just observe that there are all these differences, and you know, that's probably a large part of the story.
Yeah, clearly there's an apparent disconnect. The newer generations of similar kinds of complex integrated systems in the commercial world are actually decreasing in price. So it's not a given that because you have more capability, the cost has to go up. And it'd be very interesting for us to see what the differences are between our world and the commercial world. That the commercial world costs are going down with increased complexity, our costs are going up.
Representative
Mr. Francis,
Bartlett?
your written testimony references challenges integrating mission packages with LCS. Can you please elaborate on the weight and personnel issues that may impact the mission package integration? To your knowledge, what steps is the Navy taking to manage these issues?
Mr. Bartlett, as you know, the mission packages are not included in the ship itself, and I think a rough order of magnitude is to get the mission packages on the LCS going to add about $100 million to the cost per ship. So the costs we've been talking about have been C-frame so far. So we add the mission packages. That's a separate development effort, as you know, and separately funded. What we're seeing in that so far is the Navy has allotted about 180 tons on the ship for the mission packages. Right now, it looks like they're overrunning about 13 tons right now in development. And similarly, I think there's about 35 people allotted to man those mission packages, and we understand right now that there are roughly about 7 people over that, and we're currently in development. Some of the challenges associated with that is the number of the mission packages have been reduced in size so that the redundancy you might have for if one component goes out, you'd have another one there. That's gone, and a lot of the organic maintenance that would be on the ship right now is gone. So I think the Navy is working very hard to try to manage the weight and the people, but they're having to make trade-offs in potential capability.
Thank you. The cost growth on LCS-1 was really quite perplexing because, as you mentioned, it was essentially a C-frame, and one would have suspected that the major uncertainties would have been in the packages. Mr. O'Rourke, sorry that I didn't get your gesture. You had a comment on our prior question?
Just a quick addendum, which is that the question you asked about why the cost of ships is going up the way that it has is a question that the previous CNO asked during his time in office, and he went off and asked the RAND Corporation to study that question. RAND did look into it in a formal analysis. They reported out their results last year, and I will make a copy of that analysis available to your office.
Oh, thank you very much. And one last quick question for any of the witnesses. Have you seen any changes in the Navy's program management, ship construction supervision, contracting, or cost-estimation procedures since the stop work and termination of LCS-3, which would indicate a change to best practices incorporating lessons learned?
Just to start, I've seen things that I can point to. One is a beefing up of the oversight staff for the program, both on the private sector side and on the Navy side. And just to cite one other example, there has been a change in the cost estimating standard that is being applied to the program.
So you would anticipate from that we wouldn't have this spread in the next?
I think both of these things are helpful. But in terms of lessons, as I said earlier, I think this is not so much a case of new lessons to learn as it is to apply old lessons that were learned long ago.
Mr. Bartlett, we've seen, I think the Navy is moving more towards putting confidence levels in their estimates. There's a debate as to what level that should be. The DAPA panel says 80%. I think the CAG would say it needs to be less than that. But the fact that they are starting to do that is a step in the right direction. By the same token, we do see some, I'd say, shortfalls in the ability of Soup Ship to oversee some of the construction contracts and to get the kind of cost data they need to react quickly to problems. So I think the picture's mixed. If I could offer a comment, Mr. Bartlett, on cost caps, I just wanted to say, I think once we get to the point where we're considering cost caps, I think the battle may be lost already. Really, your point of leverage is early when you're setting requirements and doing design. And I think one of the things we'd have to do up front better is to identify what trade space we're going to have, maybe within the ship or other ships, so that if cost becomes a problem, you can make trades. Because I think once the design is set and the strategy is set, I think the cost cap really is going to be a victim of what happens on the program. So it's, I think, a measure that probably comes too late.
Mr. Bartlett, I guess the only thing I would add to that, because I would echo some of the things Mr. O'Rourke said, is that a lot of these issues come up because I'm not convinced the Navy has realistic cost estimates for their ship programs to start with. If the Navy had come to the Hill, for example, and said they thought the LCS was going to cost $450 million, it would not have come as a shock as much to see some cost growth with that type of a number as opposed to $220 million to start with. So a lot of it is sort of in the setting of expectations and what your baseline is to start with.
And I would say that looking at the issue of cost growth and realistic costing from the perspective of the overall shipbuilding program, we'll have to wait to see whether the improvements that Mr. O'Rourke mentioned and Mr. Francis mentioned translate into the Navy's programming process. Because right now, the Navy is basing its future years ship program on unrealistic estimates. They're top-down driven estimates. When they derive the costs of several of the classes of new ships, they've done that by allocating budget shares and dividing the number of ships that they want to buy into a budget share. That's what they have done in generating their 30-year shipbuilding plan. So those don't generate realistic estimates, and I don't think they generate, for either the Department or the Congress, a realistic appraisal of the number of ships that are going to be bought. So if these improvements in pricing out the individual ships and pricing them at something a little bit higher than the 50th percentile level of confidence translate into more realism in the shipbuilding program, that would be a good thing, but we haven't seen the next 30-year shipbuilding program yet, so we'll have to wait.
Mr. Chairman, one quick last comment, which may or may not need some observation by the panel. Clearly, we want our new ships to be as good and capable as they can be, but very frequently getting that last 5% improvement in capability may double the cost. Is there somebody sitting at the table that's challenging these requirements that the contractor gets from the Navy? Say, do you really need that? That'll cost you twice as much as if you only ask for 95% of that capability. Do we have those discussions?
Well, they're supposed to occur. When I worked in the department, I worked for the Office of Program Analysis and Evaluation, which provides the guidance and oversees the conduct of what are now called analyses of alternatives, which, if done correctly, are done before a program's requirements are set and explore exactly the issues that you described. What do you have to pay realistically to get a certain level of requirements? And if you're willing to back off that level of requirements, how much might that cost? And would that still produce an article that was useful, that could, do what people think needs to be done? Perhaps not as much as people would like, but still make a useful contribution to the missions the Navy is pursuing. And those kinds of analyses are supposed to be done. But my experience is that often they're done in a way that supports conclusions that adopts assumptions that drive the analysis to support conclusions on what the capability should be that have already been reached before the analysis explores those issues.
Mr. O'Rourke.
Just as, again, a quick adjunct, there used to be an organization at one time in the Navy for many, many years that perform the function of being the requirements police, if you will, to add some discipline into the requirement setting process, and that was the Ship Characteristics Board or the Ship Characteristics Improvement Board. That board was disestablished some number of years ago, and we went through a period of time when the Navy was looking at some ship designs when that board was not in place. Now, the Navy has now reestablished this organization under a new name. And so they do now, once again, have in place an organization that can act as the requirements police, if you will, to help separate requirements from desirements. And the proof will be in the pudding. We'll have to wait and see just how tough this board acts in terms of actually policing requirements and making sure that the Navy doesn't let its requirements get away from them. But the Navy has once again reestablished that organization.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman from Maryland. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Ellsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I have to admit that my past dealings with government contracts have been more in the tens of millions and not these numbers that you've been talking about today. And I'm even more proud now, Mr. Chairman, that the last jail that I built came in $500,000 under budget. And That makes me even more proud now. Now that we hear about these government projects, there's a few things we've talked about today that concern me. My first question is that on the change orders that you all see, who's more responsible when we're in this shipbuilding project? Is it the Navy that comes in and says, the hole's there, they start putting the guts in this thing, they say, no, we'd like this switch moved over here, we want to do it with our left hand instead of our right, or we'd like this window to be here, or this, whatever it might be. Who does more of that? The shipbuilder saying, oh, here, we've got our schematic design on the table, but now it's up, we've got steel hung, we can't do that, we've got to change it. Is there a feel for that? Who has more of that, the Navy or the shipbuilder themselves? That would naturally add to that cost when we switch this over here. Does that make any sense at all?
We don't have any, at least CBO doesn't have any data as to who is the initiator of a lot of those changes, whether it's the contractor or the Navy. But I can say it sort of at a general level that a lot of times those change orders are at the instigation of either the contractor or the Navy because maybe they just want something different than what was originally there. But in many other instances, when you translate a design that's on paper into actual construction, things don't necessarily, through no fault of anyone really, work out in reality the way they seem on paper. So, you know, it looks like a certain pipe can be hung in a certain way, and when you actually start building the thing, oh, that isn't going to work for whatever reason, and so that becomes a change and a change order under that category. But this sort of, we don't have data that I can break out as to levels of responsibility or attribution.
You can take those change orders and divide them, if you will, into two basic groups. One are those that arise as a function of the construction process of the ship that Eric just talked about, and the others are those that have to do with the fact that the Navy has reconsidered what it wants the ship to be or what it wants the ship to do. Ultimately, final responsibility for those change orders happening and being put into place resides with the Navy. And it's especially that second category that I think people are concerned about, because those are the ones that are more likely to be initiated by the Navy and might be initiated by the Navy in part because the Navy had not completely thought through ahead of time what they wanted that ship to be, what they wanted that ship to do. I think the Navy recognizes that, and they are trying to move back now to a greater sense of self-discipline on requirements so that they don't come back later with the second group of change orders that gets added to the first that are going to arise as a result of the construction process.
Mr. Ellsworth, I will say change orders are expected, and they build in a number in all the cost estimates and the contracts for change orders. So I don't know the answer to this question, but it's a good one to see. You know, how are we doing that? Are those budgets anywhere close to reality? Because there is an expectation of a fairly significant level of change order traffic.
But that's certainly not making up the kind of dollars we're talking about, the increase of the total price of the ship. I would hope they're changing, right. or the person that draws the ship needs to go back to drafting 101, I'd say. It kind of leads me to the next question. It sounded like in the very end of your all's presentation and Mr. Bartlett's questioning that maybe Congress and the Navy, we should probably past Congresses, haven't really demanded very accurate figures. I mean, is that fair to say that we're talking about so many dollars that the old saying about a billion here or a few $100 million here, we kind of expect that maybe we haven't had that construction manager in there, or that person that's watching that cost, and as it gets away from us, it's like, well, this is going to be $100 million here. Has Congress been doing our job to watch it and really put the thumb down saying this needs to come in, I mean, maybe not on budget or under budget, but at least, you know, some kind of reasonable figure?
I think that's an astute observation, Mr. Ellsworth, and I think it transcends the acquisition world, not just shipbuilding. There are those who would say the acquisition process is broken and it needs to be fixed. I would offer a different explanation. I think the acquisition process is in equilibrium, and part of the rules of the game is, as we were talking earlier, performance sells. So higher requirements are going to allow your alternative, whether it's a ship, an aircraft, a missile, a tank, to defeat any other alternative. So you have to have high performance, but you also have to have low cost. Your cost has to fit in the budget. And that's sort of and I'm not trying to be glib about this, but that's sort of the rules of the game. To get a program into the budget where you can actually start to attract funds to do something, there are conventions that you build around that. And we kind of all participate in that. So if the Navy, for example, were to come here and say, you know, the cost of the LCS is actually going to be $500 million, not 200 million, well, then the budget would only accommodate maybe 20 ships and not 55. So you might say no. And nobody wants to get a no answer. So it's easy for you if the budget proposal when it first comes in is low, because then you don't have to make trade-offs. And that our system kind of works that way.
It seems like it's heading that way. I know with the MRAPs, we've had a lot of discussion about that. We went from, was it 6 million to 16 million apiece? Was my recollection on the cost of the, oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm thinking about the
EFE?
The other boat.
If I could add a couple things to that. In addition to sort of the sociology of the situation that can drive people to price things to sell and price things to get programs started, there's a couple of other things, which is Congress can demand realistic estimates, but once it gets estimates, it may not always have enough information to evaluate independently whether, in fact, that estimate is realistic. Now, I remember a hearing that Chairman Taylor held a year or two ago where the DDG 1000 was discussed, and as I recall, he asked Admiral Hamilton, will you, wager 1 or 2 months of your pay to make sure that the DDG 1000 is going to come in at cost? And Admiral Hamilton said yes. And so we have that commitment there, but once the Navy says that, what position is Congress in to evaluate that number and say, well, okay, well, he said it was, but how do you parse that number apart and say, was Admiral Hamilton right about that or not? The other issue is that the evidence for these numbers being wrong, as was mentioned earlier, always comes years later. So by the time it comes in, it's a different cast of characters. And the people who talk to you at the time about whether a number was supposedly realistic or not, they're gone by that time. And I've seen this, I think we've all witnessed this on a number of systems over the years. So there's the issue of consequences and accountability in a system where people have only limited tenures in office. By the time some of the different numbers start to become available to Congress, we're dealing with, not with the people who originally spoke to those numbers, but with their successors or even their successors' successors.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Chairman, if I could have one more question. Certainly. One of you, and I can't remember which one, we're talking about, it's about the 60% point of construction that we really start projecting those costs. And I don't remember which one of you were talking about that, Mr. Yes. Francis. Could you just go with that and kind of elaborate on that just a little bit, why that is, that we get to 60 and then we start knowing the cost? Is that the price of steel, the price of technology? We think we have all those bugs worked out, those change orders. Is that when we...
Yeah, the 60% is a number that we've observed in looking at actual construction of ships. I wouldn't say it has scientific precision, but back-of-the-envelope precision. But basically, the main thing we see is that's when labor hours really start to come in, and you can start then measuring how many labor hours we're associating with work packages. Because once you get into construction, your packages of work are pretty discrete, and you know whether or not you're starting to construct in a certain sequence because you plan to do things in a certain order. When you get past the halfway mark around 60%, you start to realize, one, what actual labor is taking, and two, the things that didn't get delivered to the yard in time, they're starting now to disrupt the construction sequence. And that's the point maybe of reckoning where you have to admit, gee, the schedule isn't going to go the way we want it. And we either have to add more calendar time, which is labor and overhead, or we have to put more labor on it and drive the cost up. And in some cases, too, and ships are unique in this respect, because of the long construction time, the price of materials does change. Even though we put in economic adjustment clauses, the price of steel in a number of the ships that we've looked at has gone up when they're in that stage of construction.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony. Mr. Chairman, I'd yield back.
Chair, thanks the gentleman. Gentlemen, given Number one, thank all of you for being here. And given our desire to not be surprised with an LCS type scenario again, or a Deepwater type scenario, both of which are regrettable. They happen, they're hopefully being fixed, and what we don't want to see is this become a reoccurring problem. I'm curious to hear your thoughts if there is an institutional problem within the Navy to where there is no one person who is responsible for all shipbuilding programs for a long enough period of time, given how long it takes to go from development, R&D, to actual construction to delivery, for a long enough period of time where there's one person who, in effect, is not going to let this happen on their watch. Is this something this committee ought to be looking into? It's strange that you should mention Admiral Hamilton, heck of a nice guy. Bottom line is, I'm told he's going to retire in September. So he's not going to be around in position to make good on that bet one way or the other. And that would be an example of this. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Again, it's, the Navy guys are going to be, I have great respect for them, they're going to be kind of restrained by the uniform they wear as to what they can say. So what are your thoughts?
Just one thought to start the answer, which is that within the Navy, there already is a model of a person who has a much longer tenure in office, and that tenure was designed specifically because it was felt that it would be beneficial for someone to be around long enough to live through the consequences of actions or decisions that were made earlier in that person's tenure, and that's the Director of Naval Reactors.
Admiral Donald.
Currently Admiral Donald, that's right, who's the fifth person to hold that office in about 50 years. Now, that term of office is 8 years, and there are very few other parallels in the federal government for that. That long term of office reflected a sense many years ago when Naval Reactors was being set up that this was a very special, very important technology, and therefore a person of that tenure would be beneficial in helping to bring it to come to pass and to make sure that it was done right. But if we decide now that shipbuilding, because of the very long time spans, because of the large amount of dollars involved, and because of consistent congressional concern over the issue over the years, has now become an issue like that, or sort of like that, then one possible model would be to look to what we have with naval reactors and not necessarily copy it verbatim, but look at it as a rough model for doing something within the shipbuilding arena that is maybe a little bit like that.
Is there value to that, in your opinion?
I think that there's merit enough that it may be worth investigating. There's always downsides to these options as well, and there are differences between shipbuilding in general and the responsibilities of naval reactors in particular. But what I want to get across is that we do have this model over here which does seem to have worked well for this one function of bringing nuclear power to the Navy. And so if we have that model, and if it's a model also that Sean O'Keefe, after leaving the Navy, felt that NASA could benefit from, then maybe it can be something that a part of the Navy elsewhere can also benefit from. Again, I can't make a recommendation on the issue one way or the other, but I do think it's a model that there has been enough evidence accumulating on for at least people to look at that and come to a decision about whether they think that would make sense or not.
Would any of you other gentlemen like to weigh in? And I very much appreciate your answer, Mr. O'Rourke.
If you don't have a realistic cost estimate to begin with, it doesn't matter how long the person is there. They're not going to be able to manage the program to achieve an unrealistic target. Now, to the extent that longer tenure would mean that might translate into the person being responsible at the initial stages of the program where the first cost estimates are generating more realistic ones, that might help. But there's still all these incentives in the system to generate estimates that are optimistic. And estimates that are a little bit low are probably good because they help you manage the program and control costs, as Mr. O'Rourke has mentioned. But estimates like the ones that existed for LCS and that exist for DDX or for DDG 1000 probably aren't helpful because they're too low initially. I mean, the initial estimates for DDG 1000 for the fifth ship were about $1.1 billion, and the Navy is now admitting that in its estimates the cost will be maybe 3 times that, 2 or 3 times that, and our estimates would be a little bit higher. So the initial estimates for that program were extremely optimistic, and disagree a little bit with with my colleague, Mr. O'Rourke, there were plenty of people inside the Pentagon at the time those estimates were generated that knew there was no way in the world those ships were going to be built for that cost. So sometimes that's known very, very, very early on, and if you try to manage the program to those targets, you just can't do it.
Just one quick additional comment, and not to disagree with what was just said, but we've had a number of hearings this year, as you're aware, on the Deepwater program, and at one of those hearings, it was one of those on the House side, the Commandant was asked, well, who's responsible for this situation? And I thought his answer to that question was fairly powerful. He said, in essence, I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, he said, well, you know, the program manager and the chief engineer of the Coast Guard and the Vice Commandant of the Coast Guard and the Commandant of the Coast Guard at the time are all no longer here. And I think that gets to the crux of your question.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Francis.
My boss, David Walker, has recommended that type of position for the Department of Defense, a chief management officer who would have a tenure long enough that they could, let's say, last through the ups and downs of individual decisions. So I think conceptually something like that in the Navy is something worth considering. I would have to add that person would have to be empowered to make decisions, and they would have to be supported by the kind of systems like Dr. Gilmore just said, you know, cost estimating, good trade-offs. In other words, they need a support system to generate business cases that they can make good decisions about. And one of the things I worry about is what's going on in the program offices and the PEOs, because I think there's really exceptional people there, but I think when they get unexecutable programs, we're grinding them up. So we have to find some way to allow the PM to weigh in and be able to say when something isn't doable or unexecutable. And that type of information would have to get to that level.
One more quick comment,
Sure.
which is that although I've mentioned the fact that there are a lot of old lessons that can be brought back in and reinforced, there are, I think, some new ideas out there. And one of those that I think has particular promise is the concept that Admiral Sullivan has promoted for reducing the Navy over the longer run to a smaller number of common hull designs, so as to recover some of the lost economies of scale that were suffered by the Navy when the shipbuilding rates went down. That idea, I think, has a lot of promise for being a powerful engine for reducing ship costs and for allowing the country to support a larger Navy for a given amount of dollars. But it's also a vision that would take a long time to implement over time. And if you have an idea like that requires somebody to be behind it consistently over time, then having someone in the Navy who has a long tenure in office to pursue that idea and to make the decisions at the critical points a long time to help make that vision come about, it can be potentially beneficial for doing that. So if you have an idea for reducing ship costs that is inherently one that would take a long time to implement, which strikes me as what you have in the case of what Admiral Sullivan is proposing, then that might lead you to think, well, maybe the person in charge of implementing it should have a longer term of office.
Well said. Gentlemen, I'm, within, seems like within days of the change with last November's elections, had the Secretary of the Navy come see me and said, man, we got a big problem with LCS. Commandant of the Coast Guard shows up, got a big problem with Homeport. Let's just say both of them kind of took me by surprise. And water under the bridge. My point being, do you see anything that we're missing, any problems that we can prevent by actions this summer or this fall that are coming down the line anywhere near those problems that probably could have been avoided or certainly mitigated? In the case of the Coast Guard, apparently the Deputy Commandant had raised concerns about premature failure of the hull. In the case of LCS, someone had to see that there was a problem last summer and it wasn't telling us. So is there anything that you see that we should be addressing now?
Mr. Chairman, if I can start,
Certainly.
I would say we really need to be looking at the DDG 1000 and the CVN 78 because, again, the monies that you're going to authorize in 08 or in 09 are going to form part of their business cases.
Your specific concerns with those two hulls are what?
On the DDG 1000, when we convened here last year, I think the cost estimate at the time was $3.3 billion per ship, and the Navy then went through a cost estimating reduction, or a cost reduction on the ship, and got it down to $3 billion. And the idea was to keep the 0.3 in there as a hedge against future cost growth. My understanding is that money has been scrubbed out of the program, so we have, I think, a very tight cost estimate on that program. And the other things we need to be looking at is what's happening with the key technologies on that, and are we holding schedule? So that's my concern there. On the CVN 7...
Do you know of any specific instances where your concerns that you can name as a for instance?
Two for instances. One is the dual band radar, which affects both the CVN and the DDG 1000. They've had trouble generating the power out of the transmit-receive units that they need for that radar, and it doesn't look like they're going to be able to generate that power until they get that system into production. If the dual-band radar does slip, the current construction sequence is to install the radar into the composite deck house and deliver that as a unit. That's going to be the construction sequence. If the dual-band radar gets delayed much further, they're going to have to install the deck house first and then put the radar in afterwards. That's going to be a cost issue. The other thing on the DDG 1000 is the software, the total ship computing environment. That was to be released in 6 stages. The first 3 went okay, but a lot of work now in the last 3 has been deferred, basically reflecting late delivery of information like vendor-furnished information where the software has to wait. So there's going to be more software work at the tail end of the program on that.
Mr. Francis, I very much appreciate that. If you have that or any other concerns, I know this committee would welcome hearing them up front, so hopefully we can address them before the nation has a needless delay or needless expenditure of funds.
Mr. Chairman, just to add 2 quick things, of things that the committee might consider doing this summer as it looks forward into the shipbuilding program. One would be to look for instances of where a cost-plus type contract is being combined with a schedule-driven program, because that's one of the other lessons that were forgotten that came out of LCS. It has been commented by others as a recipe for cost growth, and so you would look to see if there were other instances in the Navy shipbuilding program that combine those 2 things together. And the second thing, I think...
And again, do you have any specific examples of where you see a training?
I'd have to go actually survey the programs to see which programs would meet both of those conditions. But that definitely is something that the committee may want to consider doing on its own, and then arrive at their own judgments about which programs may satisfy both of those conditions. And the other thing that the subcommittee, I think, may wish to do this summer is gain a better understanding of the risk balance of the cost estimates, that is, the cost estimating standards that were used to estimate the cost for each of the Navy shipbuilding programs, so that you at least have that baseline data to then evaluate what the Navy is really telling you when they give you an estimate for each of these programs.
Anyone else? If not, the chair is going to recognize. I'm trying to remember who got here first. Was it Admiral Sestak? Okay, Mr. Courtney was here first, but has no questions. All right, Admiral Sestak.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. If I could follow up on the question that Mr. Francis, that you asked. When the funding went from $3.3 billion to $3.0 billion, did requirements fall out?
Some ship content was taken out. So I think a magazine was taken out. So some of the, I think the content of the advanced gun system. So some specific things were taken off. I wouldn't describe them as a complete capability, like, gee, we lost the gun or we lost the radar, but less capacity, if you will.
So CWIS, Slick 32, the tail, all that's, whatever's going to happen to that, none of that's a consequence of going from trying to squeeze down to 3.0. It was just a ship's content.
To bind knowledge, yes, sir.
Some of it was content, some of it was things like documentation for the program that was judged to be no longer necessary. If I remember right, at the time, the Navy testified that the actions it took, which we're talking about things that were in the spring and summer of last year, or at least that's when we talked about it, had the effect of reducing the lead ship cost by $250-something million and having the effect of reducing the follow-on ships cost on a recurring basis by 200 and something in the teens million dollars, 215, something like that. So there was content taken out of the design, but there were other things as well in terms of documentation.
Mr. Rourke, in your question on Admiral Sullivan's proposals for 3 or 4 common hulls, if one of those hulls, the cruiser, let's say, that idea you have of DDG 1000 becoming the CG, if it's to be nuclear powered, does that have implications for that?
It does, because for one thing, the nuclear power plant that the Navy's considering might not be easily fittable into the DDG 1000 hull, in which case that might tend to argue in favor of going to a different hull design for a nuclear powered version of the ship. That's not clear at this point. But what I do want to emphasize is that Admiral Sullivan is talking along these lines, and if you had one person in office over a longer span of time to make decisions about implementing that, then you could maintain that momentum of vision to help bring it about. But yes, the nuclear power issue is one that could be become a hard choice for the Navy in terms of whether to stick with hull commonality or not within the DDG 1000 and CGX efforts.
Just one last one. You had mentioned, I think it was you, Mr. Francis, I'm trying to read my notes that I wrote as you were talking. This is a, even though you didn't say it, this is really a ship control, software-controlled ship. Even the engineering software is all automatic, and it fits into, and I forgot what you call it, a tactical ship control system.
Total ship computing environment.
Computing system. So your comment about vendors, there was the delay because of vendors. That I assume these vendors were probably software vendors that didn't potentially have the engineering code done so that the combat systems, the overall ship, could be done. My question is how we fund these ships. And I can't remember the terms, partial funding, incremental funding. There has been some reports that has had an impact upon the subprime contractors. That, way down the detail, these vendors aren't able to get the money to start the engineering code, which impacts the overall thing on such a ship that's built upon software. Is that part of the reason for the delay, some of the delays? How we do the process of funding?
Well, on the vendor-furnished information, what I was referring to is not so much the software vendors, but for the people doing the software for the ship. They need specific information coming from the detailed design of specific subsystems that a vendor may be supplying. So that could be a fire control system, it could be a missile or so forth, but they need the specific specifications from that system to build that into the code for the entire ship. So they may not necessarily be software vendors in this case. And
the overarching question of the process, is the way we fund an issue in this?
In this case, I don't see, and I'd be interested in what my colleagues have to say, but I don't see where split funding or incremental funding would have a direct impact on the ability to get money to the key vendors when they need it. I mean, it's a way to fit in the Navy's budget, but for the DDG 1000, for example, we do have, roughly 2.7 billion in each year's budget. It seemed to be that would be enough money to get the front-end loaded work done to the vendors.
I would agree with that, Congressman, because the way the Navy sort of handles when they do split funding, at least the way it should be done, is that they when they do get authority to do split funding or incremental funding, they are funding the things that they need to have done to support their vendors to get the ship constructed on time. And that's the way they sort of, allocate the funding. So if there is a problem there that is a result that money isn't getting to the vendors that need to get the money in the proper amount of time, I would suggest that that's probably more of a management issue than it is a funding issue.
It's not technically funding, but one difference in an acquisition arrangement that can affect the lives of the vendors is whether or not you use something like multi-year procurement. That's a contracting arrangement, not a difference in how you fund the program. But if you were to go to multi-year procurement on a shipbuilding program, then both the shipyards and the vendors would have confidence in the future business that would come from the procurement of those downstream end items, and they could therefore take steps to optimize their workforce and their production plant to build what they build at the lowest possible cost. In my earlier testimony, I talked about the option of not of an official multi-year, but of the alternative of a block buy. And I raised that alternative because in the case of the two programs I mentioned, which were the destroyer and the aircraft carrier, we will not be able to use a multi-year for some number of years until that lead ship is delivered. But in the meantime, you could use a block buy. That would at least allow the shipyards to optimize their workforce and their productive plant and get some savings. But one difference between a block buy and a multi-year is that it does not include the authority to bring long lead items forward and fund them all at once. So the vendors wouldn't benefit from that. They would, however, still benefit from the confidence in future business that you would get from the block buy.
Very last question, if I might, just one last one.
Sure.
Did you all read the article by Secretary Winters in Proceedings last month?
The one based on his speech.
Yeah, I didn't know if you addressed. It was laid out his approach. It was titled "Tough Love."
The tough love speech.
Did you all talk about that and the value, if you saw of his 7 or 8 points? Have you talked to him that? Spoken?
I think Eric and I probably have talked about it together at the time that it came out.
Is there value in what those various points he brought out?
I think there's potential value in some of the things he talked about, at least, if not all of them. There's probably points in there that would need to be debated. I think it reflected a recognition on the part of the Secretary of the Navy that shipbuilding is central to the future of the Navy and that it therefore deserves oversight attention at the highest levels.
No, I would agree with Mr. O'Rourke on that. I mean, there are certainly things in there that are worth exploring and doing. Other things you're going to have to sort of think about and explore in a little bit more detail. But he's got his eyes apparently focused on the problem, and I think that certainly deserves some commendation.
I thought the most salient point that he made, though, was this tyranny of optimism that you probably spoke of. I mean, that the service can lose and is losing credibility by this effort to try to fit, to your words in the split funding, things in, and over the longer term, that can stand it not in good stead. Do you agree with that, Dr. Gilmore?
Yes.
You've come from PA&E, so.
Well, as I said before, though, these problems aren't unique to shipbuilding. You look what has happened with the F-22 program, for example, and of course that got caught up in the end of the Cold War, but nonetheless, there were plenty of problems that occurred with the program after that. And the Air Force spent $5 or $6 billion a year developing that program for 10 or 15 years, and is now going to get about 180 planes out of it, which is, 10% or less of the overall inventory of planes that they'd like to maintain right now. Now, the situation in shipbuilding isn't nearly as dire, but I went, the reason that I provided some of the numbers at the outset of my testimony on what we spent during the Cold War, the number of ships we bought, and how the price per ship has escalated quite a bit, along with the capabilities of the ships, no doubt. It was to point out that the shipbuilding program is facing a similar situation, not as stark in terms of numbers and budgets, but still a similar situation to the situation that the Air Force is facing in terms of modernizing its fleets of tactical aircraft, and, for example, the situation that the Army is facing with the Future Combat System. So, as you know, these problems have existed for a long time. Some of them are now becoming more apparent in terms of what's actually happening versus what the predictions were of some people several years ago. And I would say that whatever actions you take, if you don't have If you don't have realistic estimates at the beginning of the program of what the program will cost, you will run into trouble. And you know, to say that we should manage these programs to cost really isn't addressing the problem, because if the initial cost estimates are very unrealistic, no manager, no matter how intelligent or how heroic, is going to be able to manage a program to hit a cost estimate that is completely unrealistic.
Thank you.
Mr. Susnek, I have Dr. Winter's points right here, and I know when I went through them, I think, you know, the first one he makes about who's going to be the integrator, I mean, that's a sophisticated discussion, I think, that needs to be had. And I think, you know, Mr. Taylor brought up the issue of deep water. We've had issues with a contractor's integrator there. We have it on future combat systems. So I think that's a rich debate that needs to be had, not an easy one. But the other points are, in principle, hard to argue with. You know, when the Navy must define design constraints to optimize the capability of the fleet. Contractors must design for production and sustainment. The Navy needs to use independent cost estimates for trade-offs. Detailed design constructions must be supported by mature specifications. And the Navy needs to provide knowledgeable program oversight. These seem like almost inarguable principles, I would say.
Now, let me just comment with regard to independent cost estimating. The Navy eliminated its capability to do independent cost estimating. Its own independent cost estimating office was essentially eliminated. Now it's been rebuilt a little bit, but it's nothing like it was in terms of capability previously. So again, it's, as Mr. Francis pointed out, I can't argue, I wouldn't argue with the need for independent cost estimating, but the Navy doesn't have much capability there now.
That was 096?
Yeah, it was, well, it was, I was thinking of, what was it? It was, well, it was the Navy Independent Cost Estimating Office. That's not its exact, that wasn't its exact title, but I can't remember what it was, but it was eliminated at one point.
Okay. Thank you, Admiral. The chair very much wants to thank our panel. I think you have done a great job of enlightening us, and we appreciate you being here. And the chair is going to dismiss you all and ask for the second panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nice to see you again.
Hi, Admiral. How are you?
Hi, Admiral. Nice to see you.
I'm going to stick around until about 10.
Okay. That's fine.
That's right. I've been so focused on hearing. I haven't been focused on
Mr. Elsworth's going to take the chair, so we can keep going.
So excited talking to O'Rourke.
Hi. Yeah. Lucky sound. Okay. Well, okay. Yeah. Wow, you're right down the road. I know we live down there. Okay. Okay. Wow, small world. Oh, you are? Okay. Okay, well, you're welcome. We've been there since 61. Yeah. Big changes in that area. Yeah. We're the last farm. Last one. From Buckystown on. Well, there. Oh, thanks for saying hello. Okay.
You're here. Okay. Yeah.
Hey, Admiral.
Hi, friend. How are you? Good to see you.
Long time no see.
Yeah, okay.
Good to see you. Okay, subcommittee will come to order. The second panel that we're very fortunate to have with us this afternoon is composed of representatives from the Department of the Navy, Vice Admiral Paul Sullivan, Ms. Allison Stiller, Rear Admiral Barry McCullough, and Mr. Dub Summerall. Thank you all for being here. Again, given the depth of knowledge that you bring to the table, we don't want to unnecessarily limit you with the 5-minute rule. I would remind you that I've got to leave at about 10 till to visit with the speaker on something. So do what you can to stay near the 5-minute rule, and then we're going to, Mr. Ellsworth will take over.
Yes, sir. Chairman
In particular
Taylor,
order, Ms. Stiller.
I'm going to give an opening statement for the four of us. Chairman Taylor, Mr. Bartlett, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss the topic of Navy surface ship construction. On behalf of Admiral Sullivan, Admiral McCullough, Mr. Summerall, and myself, I would like to submit our written testimony for the record.
Without objection.
I'd like to begin by thanking the subcommittee for its keen interest in Navy shipbuilding. I will try to condense my remarks. They were a bit lengthy. The Navy is committed to building an affordable 313 ship fleet by 2020.
Ms. Stiller,
Yes, sir.
take your time.
Okay. Well,
Again, we're happy
right.
to have you here. We want to hear what you have to say.
yes, sir. The Department continues to utilize a long-range plan for construction of naval vessels, which reinforces the 313 ship plan and is designed to stabilize workload and funding requirements. A stable plan will enable the shipbuilding industry to maintain critical skills and to make business decisions that increase efficiency and productivity. We still face challenges. Recent setbacks with the littoral combat ship have underscored the need for closer scrutiny of our acquisition process, from contracting practices to ship production monitoring. Additionally, as a result of Hurricane Katrina and the recent strike at Northrop Grumman Ship Systems Ingalls operations, the Navy is working with NGSS to review the baselines for current NGSS contracts with the Navy and to understand how to best execute the future shipbuilding efforts. The review effort will help both the Navy and NGSS to closely monitor and best utilize manning resources and facilities. At your request, I'm pleased today to provide you an update on our current surface shipbuilding programs. LPD 17 and LPD 18 have been delivered to the Navy and are now commissioned. LPD 19 is scheduled to be delivered this fall. LPD 17 was accepted with incomplete work as a result of higher than planned ship construction costs and to mitigate potential schedule or cost impacts to follow-on ships in the shipyard. The Navy decided to complete portions of the ship in the home port area after delivery to both improve the sailors' quality of life and to allow the remaining work to be completed in a more affordably by local ship repair companies using competitively bid contracts. LPD 17 recently completed her post-shakedown availability this month. All compartments and mission-critical systems are now complete. The remaining items, mainly routine maintenance work, are scheduled to be completed in the upcoming maintenance availabilities. Lessons learned and improvements identified on LPD 17 during production and since delivery have been incorporated on follow ships. In light of competing priorities for resources, the President's budget for fiscal year 08 represents the best balances of resources to requirements. However, an additional LPD 17 class ship was identified by CNO as the #1 item in this year's unfunded program requirements letter. If Congress were to provide sufficient additional funds, they could be used for a procurement of a 10th LPD 17 class ship in mid-2008. General Dynamics NASSCO has been performing well on the TAKE class, with 3 ships delivered, a successful operational evaluation, a 4th ship to be delivered later this year, and the 5th, 6th, and 7th ships under construction. The Navy and NASSCO are in the process of restructuring the TAKE contract to address the procurement of the next 5 ships, 2 more than the original 12 planned. This approach will benefit both the Navy and the shipbuilder and result in the lowest overall cost per hull over the entire class. 2 additional TAKEs were identified by the CNO in his letter as well, and the Navy would support procurement of additional ships if sufficiently funded. The CVN-21 acquisition program is designed to improve operational capability while simultaneously driving down manpower and total ownership costs. Since Milestone B in April 2004, the program has made significant progress. The Navy plans to award detailed design and construction contract for the lead ship of the class in 2008, with planned delivery in fiscal year 15. The program is fully funded to the current cost estimate, which was independently validated by OSD CAG at Milestone B, and is within the Congressional cost cap. All critical technology elements are fully on track to support the planned construction schedule. The President's budget request for CVN-21 program includes funding for the CVN-78 Ship Self-Defense System, or SSDS. Full funding of this budget request is critical. All 62 ships of the DDG-51 class have been authorized and appropriated. The final ship, DDG-112, is scheduled for delivery in 2011. The President's budget included a request for funding primarily for production shutdown requirements expected with the shipbuilders and the government-furnished manufacturers. Congressional reductions to this requested budget may prevent the Navy from meeting our contract obligations in 2008. The Navy is continuing its dual lead ship strategy for the DDG-1000 program, with lead ships to be constructed concurrently at NGSS and General Dynamics Bath Iron Works. Contracts for detailed design were awarded to the shipbuilders in August '06. Both shipbuilders were also awarded contracts for long lead material and pre-production planning to support detailed design and construction in June of '07. Construction contracts for the dual lead ships are planned to be awarded later this year. The Navy, Northrop Grumman, and GD are exploring different options on the specifics of the construction schedules based on the current and future workload of both shipyards. The DDG-1000 program continues to execute on cost and schedule. CGX is envisioned to be a highly capable surface combatant tailored for joint air and missile defense and joint air control operations. The analysis of alternatives is ongoing, and it started in June and is scheduled to complete this year. The AOA is examining both fuel-efficient conventional power plants and nuclear power plant alternatives for CGX. The Navy takes seriously the House's desire that we carefully consider nuclear power for CGX and other future platforms. However, the Navy does not support legislation that would effectively require nuclear power for major combatant vessels. The Navy supports a process that includes a rigorous technical analysis of alternatives and matches requirements with operational demands of the warfighter for the projected threats. The President's budget in 2008 also requests outfitting and post-delivery funding that ensures our ships will receive their full allowance of spare parts and operating space items. It allows for post-delivery correction of deficient government-responsible items and ensures the ability to perform essential tests and trials. Our 2008 request is fully adjusted for delivery delays resulting from Hurricane Katrina and other factors. Any reduction in this area would severely jeopardize our ability to deliver fully operational, capable, and safe ships. After an extensive LCS program assessment, the Navy has developed an executable program plan that adjusts the acquisition profile, ship cost estimates, budgets, and schedules. It also provides resources for effective management of cost, production, and technical risks to deliver the ships to the fleet to support the urgent and revalidated warfighting requirement. Progress on the LCS program continues. LCS-1 is reported by Lockheed Martin to be approximately 84% complete. The Navy currently projects LCS-1 will conduct underway trials next spring with delivery in summer of '08. LCS-2 is under contract with General Dynamics. The contractor estimates the ship is approximately 53% complete in construction at Austell and Mobile, Alabama. The Navy projects LCS-2 to launch in early '08 and deliver in late summer '08. LCS-4 has not yet begun fabrication. The Navy will continue to monitor GD's performance on LCS-2 and 4 and assess the need for further action if GD experiences cost growth comparable to LCS-1. The Navy appreciates Congress' support of the recent reprogram request for the portion of the 07 LCS funds and looks forward to working with Congress on the remaining funding required to execute the revised plan. The restructured LCS plan also includes reduced procurement of the Flight Zero's C-frames in FY08 and 09 to address critical warfighting gaps. The President's budget request for 08 is $911 million, and that's required to procure 2 LCSs in fiscal year 08. Additionally, the Navy is requesting a change in the current statutory cost cap to $460 million per ship for the 2 proposed FY08 procurements. This estimate includes total end cost, vice-only basic construction cost, and represents a 55% increase in the C-frame cost and reflects the restructured program and revised ship end cost estimates. Without an adjustment to the cost cap, the Navy will not be able to procure any new LCSs in fiscal year 08. The 2 existing C-frame designs will undergo operational performance testing in fiscal year 09, and the results will be considered as part of the Navy's evaluation for a single C-frame design selection. Flight 1 ships will be based on the selected design and will incorporate lessons learned from tests and trials. The Navy also intends to implement a government-furnished open architecture common combat system and C4I suite as part of Flight 1 to optimize life cycle cost and capability across a family of surface combatants. Subject to OSD approval, the Navy intends to hold a full and open competition for the procurement of the Navy's Flight 1 design in FY10 and beyond. The proposed acquisition strategy does not preclude continuing with both C-frames if the operational evaluation concludes the need for both. The Navy has taken swift action to ensure the lessons learned from the LCS program cost growth do not reoccur for other Navy programs. As an initial response to the findings of the LCS program assessment, ASN-RDA directed a series of specific actions to reduce risk and improve management of Navy acquisition programs. These actions have included a review of design-build concurrency risk in Navy programs, reviews of acquisition program performance conducted by portfolios such as air or ship programs, and a review of staffing levels, organization, and qualifications in both our PEOs and our on-site contractor oversight. As a longer-term effort, ASN-RDA is leading the Navy acquisition re-engineering to better control cost and requirements growth, more accurately estimate the cost risk in Navy programs, and match contracting models and incentives to the cost and risk of each program. The effort will focus resources where they're most needed and ensure our higher risk and most critical programs are resourced properly. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to discuss Navy shipbuilding. I think we have a strong plan to ensure the way ahead for the Navy meets the fleet requirements in an affordable manner. I continue to look forward to working with you in the future. Admiral Sullivan, Admiral McCullough, Mr. Summerall, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Stiller. And other than your remarks on the nuclear cruiser, I thought it was well said.
I predicted that.
And for the record, I would like you, just for the fun of it, and no, not for the fun of it, for the record, I'd like your estimate as to fuel costs for that cruiser 20 years from today, cost and availability. Because if it's nuclear, I can tell you what the cost and availability of the fuel is. For a conventionally powered platform, I'd like your projection.
Sir, I don't have a projection on that. Do you want to comment on the affordable?
You're asking for the fuel cost of a
conventionally powered
cruiser.
For the record, I would like the Navy's estimate of fuel cost and availability for 20 years from now for a conventionally powered cruiser.
I'd have to take that for the record, sir, because I can't predict the price, and I think that's your point.
Or the availability.
Or the
also
availability.
My point is the gentleman from Maryland has done, I think, an excellent job of making our nation aware. Okay, the gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that question. I would suggest that the cost will be very much higher and the availability limited 20 years from now. I have some questions I'd like, because of constraints of time, some brisk answers to. If, upon reflection, you would like to add more material, would you please do that for the record? The first question, I think, is especially important because the decision, I understand, to start construction LCS-4 is happening this week. In the March 29th brief provided to members, the Navy stated that as a part of the LCS program restructuring, the path ahead for a low-risk program would rely on the use of internal Navy cost estimates. As well, the Navy has established specific cost thresholds that would trigger a stop work on LCS-4 and possibly a renegotiation of the LCS-2 and 4 contracts. Understanding that the cost estimated at completion, the EAC, is competition sensitive, has the Navy's internal EAC for LCS-4 met or exceeded the cost threshold established by the Navy?
No, sir. The cost on LCS-4, the cost threshold was actually established for LCS-2, and no, sir, that they have not reached that threshold that you're speaking about.
Okay, my second question, really important one. The MRAP program has been given a DX priority level, the highest priority for procurement of steel. Given the importance of the MRAP program, how will this DX priority level affect shipbuilding in the near and far terms?
We have not yet evaluated in great detail because we haven't been told exactly. You have to look at how ships are, how material is procured when you're in a shipbuilding environment. They'll buy the steel as they're getting ready to build those particular modules. So it might have an impact on shipbuilding, but right now we have not seen any impact on that.
In the process of establishing this
Would the gentleman
priority,
yield?
did anybody talk to you about, yes, sir.
No, please.
Did anybody talk to you about the possible effects on your programs if they gave this kind of priority to the MRAP program?
Yes, sir, there has been a data call to look at impacts on all programs across the department. What hasn't been decided is where will the resources be deviated from, whether that'll come from shipbuilding or not.
Mr. Bartlett, we are providing data, as Ms. Diller said, on all our shipbuilding programs to RDA so that they can start to formulate a sense of what our requirements are going forward. So we are starting to put the data in place to anticipate that. If I could, just to supplement Ms. Stiller's response to the prior question, we had a production readiness review on LCS-4 on June 28th. Coming out of that, we reached agreement. Actually, the company proposed this, and we concurred with it to consider start fabrication in the September timeframe. As far as I know, that's still the plan going forward.
With the gentleman yield. And this is a follow-up. The Army was nice enough to take me to Aberdeen yesterday and show me the 9 potential MRAPs that they're taking a look at. And one in particular caught my eye. It was under license from the Israelis. And they said, well, you know, if we order this one, we're going to have to order the top half from the Israelis, and we could domestically produce the bottom half. And so I'm looking at those fairly flat steel panels on the top half that have obviously been cut, probably with a laser, given how pretty the cut was. And the repetitive of it, because we are talking now, I had an opportunity to visit with Secretary of the Army this morning, perspective. You know, you were looking at 19,000 potential panels, each one of those panels. And one of the things that the shipyards are telling us is, well, we can't invest in this laser cutting because there isn't the volume, which leads to the question, to what extent is the right hand of the DOD speaking to the left hand? To what extent are you going to places like the shipyards and say, hey, if we are in a position to work with the vendor to have this steel cut at your facility, then ship to a manufacturing plant, would you then look at getting a more efficient, high-volume machinery than you have now, making those investments? Because I'm not convinced there is a lot of integration going on as far as that kind of thought. But if there is, I'd like to know about it.
There's certainly that opportunity would present itself. In the past, the shipyards have done work on non-ship programs, so certainly that is an opportunity.
But again, Ms. Dillon, you're a very good person. We're lucky to have you serve in our country, okay? But with that said, this is a high priority program. And my apologies to my friend Pete Guerin for a temporary lapse in remembering his name. But, you know, Secretary Guerin actually threw the number out of 17,700 this morning. That's on top of the approximately 4,000 that have already been ordered. So we're talking about a mass production of something that the military desperately needs on one hand with the MRAPs. We're talking about, as we saw at Maersk, as we saw at Hyundai, something that our shipyards need to be going to, as far as laser cutting, laser welding. And they've had a reluctance to do so because they don't see the need for volume. And this really is an opportunity to get the mass production, high order quantity, short delivery time that the nation needs, and serve the long-term best interests of the shipyards. And I really do think it's important that there be a greater cooperation between the MRAP program and what you're trying to accomplish. And I don't say that to scold you. I say that as knowing that you're a capable person, to encourage you to try to make that happen, and knowing of Secretary Winter's desire to modernize the yards to the greatest extent possible, knowing that it's, at the end of the day, the taxpayer is going to pay for all of this.
Yes, sir.
So the 6 major shipyards have only one customer. We're their one customer. But this really is an opportunity to do some short-term good in the case of the MRAP, and some long-term good, something the nation needs.
Sir, I'll be happy to take that back and work with the MRAP folks.
With that, again, I very much appreciate you being here. I have a meeting concerning the Gulf Coast recovery with the Speaker, so I hope you'll excuse me, and we're going to turn the chair over to Mr. Ellsworth.
Thank you, Roscoe.
Thank you. I have several more questions, but I will ask just one more here and submit the others to you for the record, if that would be okay. It's my understanding that this last week there was a cure notice given by Lockheed Martin to Marinette Marine. What is the Navy's assessment of this contractual action taken by Lockheed Martin on LCS-1? Does the Navy believe Lockheed Martin and its subcontractor Marinette Marine will be able to achieve propulsion trials by December of '07?
I'll start this, and then I'll defer to Mr. Summerall on the propulsion trials. But the Navy has, as you know, the Navy's contract on LCS-1 is with Lockheed Martin. So our contractual relationship is with Lockheed Martin. The Navy does not have privity of contract with Marinette. There is a contractual letter. We are aware of a contractual letter between Lockheed Martin and their subcontractor, and they are working to try to resolve some issues so that they can move forward on the program. And I'll defer to Mr. Summerall on the propulsion trials and where we see that now.
It's true, we have, as a priority, we would like to see that ship go to propulsion trials in December as a risk mitigation effort. If we did trials in December, we would be able to address whatever needs were identified during those trials during the ice period up there. We have asked the company to, the Lockheed Martin team, to give us an integrated master schedule and a resource plan to support that schedule that would get us to propulsion trials in the December timeframe. To date, we have not yet received that. I believe that to try to expedite that effort was one of the reasons Lockheed made the contractual request that they did to their subcontractor. We hoped to get the initial submittal of that integrated master schedule in the next few weeks.
Presumably, Lockheed Martin selected Marinette Marine because they had a long history of delivering on time, on budget. And as was emphasized in the first panel, what Marinette Marine is building under contract to Lockheed Martin is essentially a C-frame, that the major uncertainties and sophistication will be in the modules that are procured separately. When will we learn what went wrong, that this company that was selected because they have a long history of delivering on time, on budget, now has failed to deliver either on time or on budget? When will you be able to tell us what happened?
Sir, as we outlined in our February hearing, what we think went wrong is the schedule pressure on what is basically a good contractor, driven by requirements of schedule and a design that was far more complex in the end than they bid on the ship. And the sophistication of that design, driven by the change in what I would call the builder's codes, not the military requirement, but the building specs, caused them to do a lot of rework, caused them to not be able to follow the cardinal rule of large projects, which is make sure you have the design and the drawings complete before you start construction. A lot of rework was done, a lot of out-of-sequence construction was done, and that's what got us off track.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll submit my remaining questions for the record, if that's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. The chair recognizes Mr. Courtney from Connecticut.
Mr. Ellsworth, to follow up on the last couple questions, Secretary Stiller, I mean, given all the problems and the sort of scrambling that's been going on to try and figure out what went wrong and how to fix it, I mean, does it make any sense for us to still be procuring 2 ships a year in '08 and '09? I mean, is it possible for us to even, accomplish that, given what we already know went wrong, and how it still seems like even up until just the last few weeks ago, there's still problems?
Yes, sir. From a capacity perspective, from the acquisition perspective, we have capacity. We could execute additional ships. We looked very carefully at that as we restructured the entire program. But the real driver behind why we want to continue in '08 and '09 is the warfighting requirement. And I'll turn to Admiral McCullough to address that.
Yes, sir. There is a critical warfighting gap in the area of swarm surface combatants carrying anti-ship cruise missiles, as well as the rapid clearance of mines, sea mines, in specific areas of the world, sea lines of communication. We have this gap today. We need those ships to meet the warfighting gaps that have been identified. And so the Flight Zero ships in '08 and '09 are very necessary from a warfighting requirement standpoint.
Okay. But again, just looking at the memo that was prepared by the staff, which, I mean, described a fire that took place a couple months ago, and again, the cure notice. I mean, I think what the Admiral just testified to is obviously a strategic rationale for us moving forward, but it just seems that, we also have to budget and authorize based on what's feasible, and clearly, I mean, even the Navy itself has been self-critical about being over-optimistic. I mean, are we really there now where we really feel like it's okay for Congress to proceed with that type of procurement schedule?
Yes, sir. As I said, we laid out in great detail. We looked at the program holistically and said what makes sense, and that's why the quantities are less than what we had proposed in the President's Budget '08 submission. Is we said, okay, what are the right quantities from loading in the shipyards, et cetera. So yes, we can accommodate it. As I said in my statement, the ships will both deliver in '08, and the plan is in fiscal year '09 for both C-frame designs to go through the operational evaluation. So certainly procurement can continue in the '08 and '09 timeframe, even while that evaluation is ongoing, so that we meet the warfighter need.
Thank you, Mr. Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Courtney. The chair would recognize Mr. Sestak from Pennsylvania.
Thank you very much. I had one question on the nuclear power issue now that he's left. Admiral Sullivan, as I kind of remember your study, and I haven't looked at it for a while, but it had something like $73 or something dollars per barrel, and then it went up to what's called, I think, and I've forgotten these words, fully burdened cost, which is like $153 or something. And that fully burdened cost takes into account all the storage facilities and the acquisition of oilers and things like that. Could you get back? We had some discussion on this, if you remember, a few months ago, and I failed to. I was supposed to get together with you, but I would like to know that when they did their cost-benefit analysis and the curves crossed, did you include in that the fully burdened cost? Because it seems to me that at least some elements of the fully burdened cost are a sunk cost. If this nuclear power capability is to be CGs, I think that's what it's supposed to be, cruisers. But we're still going to have such an enormous amount of other ships. If the 316? 313 has changed. But 313 is to come about. Only a relatively small amount will be nuclear powered. So that's kind of a sunk cost. Should that have been considered into your overall nuclear power study of when it became cost effective?
So I'll apologize for not following through on.
No,
on
we
that.
were supposed to. We're classmates.
We had a miscommunication, and I believe that the cost of those fuel farms was included in the fully burdened cost. What I would like to do is take for the record the analysis both with that and without that.
Because if they included all those fully burdened costs, it's kind of an unfair metric, I think, because then we're going to have those facilities anyway for all the other ships. Right. And when I read the study, it looked to me as though they included them all. I thought, but I'm probably wrong.
So we'll get you that for the record, sir, both ways.
DBR. I have to go to hearing on habeas corpus, but let me ask maybe instead is CGX. Do you still expect it to be, is it 2015, ma'am, you said you expect it? When's CGX supposed to come along, 2019?
The lead ship procurement is in FY11 with delivery in 19.
In 19.
IOC in 19.
The current
IOC in 19. IOC in 19, delivery in 17.
Correct. All right. I was just curious on that one. And DBR is probably, as they said in the previous panel, is the key long pole in the tent, correct?
Not for the CGX, Congressman. The DBR is.
I'm sorry, the.
DDG 1000.
What's the radar called?
On the CGX?
Yes.
We're currently going through an analysis of alternatives based on the potential threat set in 2024. And the initial indications that it'll be a two frequency spectrum radar. It'll be an S-band in the 3.5 gigahertz range. Can I say?
This is the one that would be embedded?
Yes, sir. Okay. Well, there's an embedded radar that Northrop Grumman Electronic Systems and Integrated Systems has shown the Navy. I don't know whether that's specifically the one that we would choose, but Northrop Grumman has at least shown that capability and concept. It's embedded in the deck house.
All right. There were some studies that were being done in other worlds that hope some propensity. I mean, we're still going down this path that we still think this radar is going to be able to do what we want on the size that we want on the ship?
Yes, sir. I believe that's within projected technology that would support that radar coming online, potentially to support a 2019 IOC of that ship.
All right. I'd asked a question of the other panel. Do you expect, I hadn't asked this one, but it was leading to, do you expect DDG 1000? Do you expect that to slip to the right again? Is there any expectations right now that software or engineering designs or anything with sub-vendors that you expect it to slip again to the right?
No, sir. We're at the point where we are getting ready to hopefully release the RFP for the two lead ships construction. Detailed design is on track. Based on current schedule, we project we'll be 85% complete with detailed design when we go to start fabrication on the two lead ships.
So the software configuration is coming along?
Yes, sir, it is. And we, during the transition to production phase 3 phase of the program, as you know, sir, we actually completed 2 million lines of code, 10 EDMs, on cost, on schedule, a $2.9 billion effort to mitigate a lot of the risk of this program. We're still on track. We're reporting metrics quarterly to OSD, CPR analysis, and other metrics in a package to OSD. So this is all available to the KEG so they can look at it during milestones.
So we won't hear 2-3 months from now that the engineering control system code has caused any perturbations in the overall tactical combat systems code and delayed us down the line? Or
no indication of that at this time, sir.
All right. Thank you. One other thing on LCS. I was taken with LCS. It seems to me that in DDG 1,000, you kind of have PEO ships and kind of in single belly button with IWS supporting and others. LCS, it seems as though there's quite a diverse group of PEOs involved. And I jotted some down, just IWS ships. You begin to get into modules.
Sure.
You have, you know, submarines, people get involved, SPA war with the communications. You have warfare centers that are involved with, you know, as we get into littoral type of stuff. Is there ever been any thought that we need to take some of the people out of the decision loop in the sense and go to a more of a single button type of approach as we do in DDG 1000? And as we look back upon any lessons learned with LCS?
On the ship side, you're
Particularly in the interface of the modules, since that's the real combat system and all, that you have these people that kind of don't work for one another, but they're really responsible in very important parts.
Yes, sir. On the ship side, as you said, PEO ships has a responsibility for the sea frame. On the mission module side, PEO LMW, Littoral and Mine Warfare, has responsibility for the mission modules. And so they go and integrate with SPA War, the laboratories, and others to pull together the mission packages. They are the belly button there. As for the interface, there is a very detailed interface specification that was part of the delay in the program way back when. Was we stopped and said we need this interface described for both sea frames so that the mission modules would work on either sea frame seamlessly. And so that interface document is developed. It's a living, breathing document that both PEOs work to. And ultimately, if there are issues, ASN RDA has responsibility over both of those PEOs. So on the mission module side, there is a single belly button to deliver the mission modules.
We've added an extra level of oversight to at least the mine warfare mission in that PEO ships has the ship, PEO LFW has the module, 2 program managers in PEO LMW, 1 for the module, 1 for the mine countermeasures suite, and PEO A in Nav Air has the responsibility for the mine sweeping helicopter. And so there are 4 program managers, 3 PEOs, 2 SysComs. Admiral Van Lett and myself and his predecessor, Admiral Massenberg, have periodic discussions with the program managers and all the PEOs in the room to synchronize scheduling.
Last question I had is, like I said, go next door, is the requirements for DDG 1000. Has there been any changes to the requirements in the time we contracted?
Congressman, there's been no change to the warfighting requirements for that ship. One of the things we have done is lay out cost drivers from a capability standpoint. And when we look at potential cost trades to drive the cost of the ship down, the PEO and I, when I was N86, the Director of Surface Warfare, would sit and figure out what we could do to get at cost. And it enabled us to reduce cost a couple $100 million by taking non-key performance parameters and non-key system attributes out of the ship to find those cost savings. And we laid it out for the leadership in a chart that showed where you could go get those type trades as opposed to where you would get trades that affected KPPs, and then where you would get trades that affected both the KPPs, key performance parameters, I'm sorry, and the schedule of delivery. So the warfighting requirements.
Which EW system are you going with?
I'm sorry, sir?
Which electronic warfare system are you going with?
We initially looked at MIFUs, and it's going to be, we found that probably wasn't the right system, multi-frequency EW system. And so because of the way that system was developing, we did a fallback to a varianted surface ship electronic warfare improvement program.
Is it as capable?
Yes, sir, it is.
Why'd we fall back to it?
It's got to do with the antenna arrays and how much capability you can put in a various antenna array.
Was the other one, if it had been borne out, been more capable?
No, sir, not from a warfighting perspective. From an antenna co-site capability, probably, but we don't envision that antenna technology
So
coming
NOLCA will
along to
be there?
support. Sir?
NOLCA will be there?
Yes, sir, there's NOLCA in the ship.
You sure?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Tomahawk's still there?
Yes, sir, you can put Tomahawks in the launchers.
And, because VLA?
Yes, sir, it'll fit in the launchers.
And the tail?
I'll have to get back to you on that, Congressman. I don't remember off the top of my head.
I was just curious. There'd been some talk that as we came down in cost, but it appears it's wrong, is that you kept the same capability?
Yes, sir, we kept the same key performance parameters in the ship and the same warfighting capability in the ship.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Sestak. Got big shoes to fill here for Chairman Taylor. We'll give it the try. Thank you all for being here. Going back to some of the prior group's testimony, we talked about the construction manager theory, and I'd like your analysis on the continuity of employees, naval employees that oversee these projects. Hey, do we have that person on scene that his focus is keep this thing going, an on-scene person that watches it day to day as these changes come up, that he has that authority, and their length of stay, the turnover that is watching out for our side. Is that person, and I'd like your analysis on that continuity of employees and how we might improve that.
Yes, sir. There are tenure agreements for the program, the PEOs, the program executive officers, and their executive directors, 4 years, as well as a major program manager. It's a 4-year tenure agreement or until you get to a major milestone. That's standard for all large ship or large programs. So pretty much any shipbuilding program will fall under that requirement. As for the on-site support, we have the supervisor of shipbuilding that falls under Admiral Sullivan's expertise, and I'll let him talk to you about program managers, representatives that are actually physically in the shipyard.
Okay, so the waterfront is supervised by a Navy captain, engineering duty officer who has been in the business probably for at least 15, probably 18 years, rotating through various jobs. His or her tenure on the waterfront in the command job is approximately 3 years, and working for that organization are a variety of disciplines, from quality assurance specialists to engineering processing folks to progressing folks who oversee the ship. And in our previous testimony, particularly on LCS, we went through the lack of numbers as far as depth chart of the folks in the supervisor's office. The ship was being built in Marinette, Wisconsin. The supervisor herself was on the waterfront at Gulf Coast in Ingalls. And so we had a detachment team up at Marinette, and we had far fewer people doing that oversight than were required. And the reason for that was a variety of reasons. One, the hurricane. Two, the 4 supervisor offices that supervise construction on our new construction shipyards have been cut 50% in staff since 1992. That doesn't relieve us of the responsibility of having to make sure we have sufficient folks on site for a high-risk program. We just didn't ramp up the staff fast enough. So when this all went down in January, February of this year, we had about 8 people on site. We are now up to 18, headed for 20, which is our steady state on site. So we're in the process of correcting the problem, but certainly we undermanned that at the start. Ms. Stiller mentioned a thing called a program manager's rep. That is a naval officer of the lieutenant commander or commander rank, typically has been in the business anywhere from 3 to 8 years, and that person has a dual reporting responsibility. They report to their waterfront supervisor of shipbuilding, and they also report to the Washington, D.C. program manager who has that 4-year tenure agreement. So that's a pretty good arrangement. It's very powerful because that person has the autonomy of having to report to both bosses. That said, earlier in the previous panel, we'll talked talked about lack of cost reporting in the Navy. We have two problems with cost reporting. First, in those cuts of the personnel on the waterfront to go watch the ships, earned value management was one of the disciplines that fell by the wayside because we just couldn't sustain the staff to do meaningful, independent cost verification. That's the first thing that we've started to work on as we've stood those back up. Second, there's a backup at headquarters there where our cost estimating shop would have normally done that earned value management independent from the Washington, D.C. viewpoint, looking at all the numbers coming in from the waterfront. Headquarters staff have been cut between the program offices and my supporting infrastructure 51% since 1992, and again, earned value management is one of the disciplines that went by the wayside. I have asked for an increase in the staff in that office so we can go regrow, but that's tough to regrow overnight because that's a specific discipline that has to be generated. Fortunately, my counterpart in the Naval Air Systems Command stuck with the earned value management system, and they have folks who may be able to help us in that process.
What you've asked for, is that the magic wand in your best estimate that says this is exactly what I need? Have you asked for exactly what you need, or have you fallen below that on the scale? Would you say if you had the total control, the budget, the manpower, and you could wave the wand?
Well, everyone would like margin in their numbers. I've asked for program office people, I've asked for technical authority people, and I've asked for on-site supervisors of shipbuilding people, and I've asked for what I consider to be the minimum.
Can you explain, CBO was in here an hour ago, and it appears that their cost estimates were more accurate than the Navy's. Is that due to the fact that you were understaffed, didn't have those people on there? Again, do we go back to that turn?
For a variety of reasons, one of which is pressure, and another of which is a lack of good cost estimating tools for this particular type of ship where it comes to LCS. And I think there was a lot of pressure from the Navy to control that program cost, and it turns out that when you set a very aggressive cost target, people will lean very far forward to try to produce that cost. So the over-optimism that you discussed on the previous panel was definitely there for LCS.
Admiral, when you said that the cardinal rule of shipbuilding was violated, that they started building before they had it finished, wouldn't there be a point where when you had the construction documents that somebody would say, ooh, the last 100 pages, the last 1,000 pages are gone here, let's not start that? I mean, should that not have been caught when we said somebody's violated the cardinal rule, we're not going to start construction here during the project review? Or can you elaborate?
Again, we went forward with full knowledge of that state of the design, and again, the pressure for cost and schedule were pervasive, and everybody leaned far forward, and you've seen the result.
When we have changes, this thing starts coming up out of the holes built, and I asked this in the last panel also. Certainly there are going to be changes. I've been involved in projects where along the way you say, this just isn't going to work, we need to change that. Who do you see having more changes? The shipbuilder themselves that says when they get it up, this pipe won't go through here, engineering-wise, we can't do this, versus when your guys go in and say, look, my sailor needs this, I need more of this, whatever, who has more of those changes that obviously are going to add to that cost when we've got to re-engineer, or you want something, where does more of that come from, the engineer or from the Navy?
The Navy program manager is limited in what changes he can approve, and there are 5 areas: safety, unavailable contractor furnished equipment, test and trial deficiencies, contractual defects, and statutory and regulatory changes that are passed down. So a program manager is very limited on the amount of change he can approve. In the case of LCS, when you're talking, we've also testified before, the naval vessel rules, which are your building codes, were also in development during the design of the ship and not into construction, but they were going on at the same time. So you had the building specs being developed at the same time, so that caused a lot of change and a lot of churn in the case of LCS. But certainly on a lead ship, you're going to see challenges as you go into production that the contractor's going to find as he starts to produce. And some of our combatants, and most of our combatant vessels, we use a design tool that's very mature, so you can see interferences and know ahead of time. But some cases you don't catch everything.
On the changes on the LCS-1, and my note shows 58 proposed change orders. Given the current issues and estimated cost, are these the things that we list in 58? I don't have them in front of me, but are they we'd like to have, nice to have, or we have to have these or need these changes?
Well, if you set the clock back to when they first started, when they were first awarded the contract, there were certainly more changes than that. The majority of the changes were generated by the shipbuilder going back, looking at the naval vessel rules, again, the building codes, the military requirement for the ship has not changed at all, but that's at the top level. There are tiered requirements go all the way down to how you will assemble pipes together. The shipbuilder looked at the naval vessel rules as they were finally published, and had to go back and do a lot of changes to his own document. Some of those didn't come before the Navy. They went before the shipbuilder's own change control board. But then the Navy also was looking at and approving drawings and looking at and approving the ship specification that the shipbuilder derived from naval vessel rules and the military requirements. And we would, on a safety or military performance basis, tell them that, well, this doesn't meet the naval vessel rules. The current round of, we're trying to close that out right now. And the current round of, if it's 58, that's approximately the number. We're actually instituted by my chief engineer, basically going up to resolve issues that we had been arguing about with the, well, not arguing, discussing with the shipbuilder, because it's a pretty robust discussion. And he actually crawled through the engine room, and they are all safety of the sailor related deficiencies, such as you can't access a circuit breaker because there's a pipe running right in front of it, or a sailor running across a deck plate, there are 3 pipes right in his walking path that he'd trip over, or you have a shaft coupling that's 4 to 5 feet in diameter rotating at several hundred RPM with no guards over it. That could kill a person walking past it. So they're small changes, but they're significant in that they are all safety related. Anything that in that screening, anything that was not absolute safety or operability related was tossed. There were about 20 to 25 changes tossed in that process.
Admiral, if I could just pile on what you just said. Thanks in large part to Admiral McCoy's personal visit up there on, I believe it was the 13th of July. We were able to come to agreement on the technical baseline, and the changes moving forward are just as the Admiral said. There are some changes in the machinery spaces for clearance safety issues to enable us to get underway on trials, but any additional changes will be deferred to post-delivery. So we are minimizing changes going forward to absolutely the bare minimum.
I characterize it as a punch list.
This kind of goes back to one of my previous questions and one for the former panel is, Congress changes a certain amount of seats every 2 years. Chairman change. You all are career, and we certainly appreciate that. We're kind of the visiting dignitaries for a certain amount of years. What would you say to the folks that might think that because of that reason, because we changed, we've got new freshmen on Seapower, and that the contractors, even though they're great contractors, they've built us great products, know that coming in, that by the time this ship gets built, these ships, that there's not going to be the oversight, and there's not going to be what this Congress approves for ships down the road could be totally different than that, and that we don't have that continuity, that it's just become that regular part of doing a federal business expected. And I said this in the last panel. I built a jail 2 years ago, and I was so proud that we came in $500,000 under budget. Everybody was shocked in my county that a government project came in under budget. It just was almost unheard of. And so we've almost come to expect that federal projects can't be on time and under budget or even at budget. And I know we're going to have overruns, and certainly a ship with its complexities is not the same, but that we're not putting enough pressure and enforcing the importance with the taxpayers' dollars of saying this thing really needs to be more in line with what you're estimating, even though it's going to be 3 years out. You've got to be better at estimating the cost of this than what you're doing, whether it's, we had a boat that's been estimated, from $6 million when the first step, now it's up to 16. And I don't think the American public minds so much, a little bit here and there, but 6 to 16 is pretty substantial. And I guess I'd like some answer to, we can say we're going to do our best and we're improving. How do we reassure the American public that, and to our vendors, that we've got to do a better job of keeping these costs closer to the estimates of what they are. That's the only way we can budget, if we know what it is. Couldn't buy a car like we're buying these ships.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
You want to take it?
I'll start. Okay. One of the keys that I mentioned too in my statement is stability. Over time, we have not given the shipbuilders the ability to look ahead and say, this is what the Navy plans to buy. And with our 313 ship Navy and where we want to go, we've laid out that roadmap, and we are attempting to stick to that roadmap so that we show them we are serious and where we are headed. Giving them that stability allows them to estimate what a ship's going to cost, knowing what the future's looking like. It's harder if you're not certain what's coming. Sure. So that's been, I think, a critical factor that the Navy, it had to start with the Navy, and we are committed to that. And I think that's an important first step in getting our arms around the cost.
And the second element, and I know the previous panel discussed this some, is the fidelity of the cost estimating tools and the training of the independent cost estimators. We've been embarked on for a couple of years on working on cost estimating tools and training our cost estimating. That's a cyclic business, and I would say 10 years ago we had a real problem in the cost estimating discipline, where we weren't hiring any new folks, and we had to go train up a whole new set. The tools, we talked about cuts in personnel, cuts in ship design and ship cost estimating tools went right, followed the same pattern of reductions that the people followed. And so the last couple of years we've been standing up some of the new estimating tools. I know you talked on the last panel about, I'll call it probabilistic cost estimating, where you don't just come up with a point estimate based on the displacement of the ship and a couple of military characteristics. We've actually worked pretty hard, and I'll say over the last 5 to 8 years, coming up with hundreds of cost estimating relationships, because their pipes cost something, engines cost something, valves cost something, the steel costs something. Each labor pool that assembles those things has a different labor cost structure and a different amount of money that you would pay that sort of an artisan. But probably the biggest thing is coming up with what is what is the probability that the cost will not exceed that cost number that you've come up with? And now, instead of arguing over who's right, we argue over where do we want to be on the probability curve, and where do you want to budget? Do you want to budget to an 80% probability of success, or 60, or 4, or 99? And a lot of the difference in the numbers that you see between us and the CBO or the GAO is based on how much risk are you willing to take.
I only have one more question, unless somebody slips me a note or as they just did. I did want to ask you if you're keeping up, if the Navy's keeping up on the situation in Wisconsin, on some labor issues that could affect the shipbuilding there and the follow-up ship. I'm not sure if it's the Boilermakers or which labor organization, but apparently there's some problems. That there's some contract problems that are causing some problems. And if you've had any update on that, or if that's any concern that the follow-up ship may be in jeopardy, or
we are aware that the shipyard is in negotiations with the union. I don't have an update today. Our supervisor of shipbuilding in the yard watches that very closely for us. But certainly we are aware. Now, whether that would jeopardize future procurements, that's usually not a factor in the Navy's decision-making on
to date, there has been no work stoppage. I don't see why going forward with the plan we have in place to do to deliver the ships in 08, to do the fly-off in 09, and then to deploy the ships in FY10, if we get additional ships in 08 and 09, I don't see why the current negotiations, labor discussions would have any impact on that company being able to compete going forward.
Thank you. And unless I get slipped another note, I'll ask you this question. Mr. O'Rourke from the last panel stated that we should rethink the $460 million cost cap, and this will be in conference, why I'm asking, that the Navy proposes because it might be too high, and I just want to know if you agree or disagree and why.
We think that the $460 million cost cap is the right number. We've worked that through our cost estimate and budget process, and we've had that approved by the CNO and the Secretary that we believe that's what these ships are going to cost to produce in FY08 dollars as an end cost.
Thank you, Admiral.
You want me to ask that?
Mr. Bartlett, any other questions?
I just want to thank both panels. Thank you very much for good testimony. Thank you.
And I'd also like to thank the four of you in both panels for that exchange, and I appreciate your time you spent with us today.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you
very much. I always feel like keep going. It's like, what else?